Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obitelli and welcome to another edition of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK. Our talks include news, conspiracy, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion and much more. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. And if there's anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback, maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can email us info@thatalks.com. And don't forget you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me here for another edition of THA Talks. It's going to be another one about politics today, which makes me want to just sort of throw this out there actually. I've noticed we've been bringing a lot of political talks onto the show. Now this isn't a particularly conscious decision. I think it's down to two things. I think one, we're very busy, so we tend to sort of go with the people we're involved with a lot more, which is political people at the moment. A lot of people in the THA network are very sort of actively out there among the political movement, so it's easy to grab them and when we find them and pull them on the show, and we have some fantastic shows doing that. So that's probably one reason. And the other reason, it's so interesting at the moment, politics, because it's got so much to talk about and so much questions to ask about it and predictions. And it's just very exciting at the moment. But I do want to clarify, we're still very diverse in our approach. And I mean, we like to pride ourselves on that we cover shows that the mainstream media might not cover, or if they do cover, they like to dance around it a little bit more and have their sort of contrived way of dealing with it. I mean, I think the mainstream media is reacting to alternative media at the moment and is throwing its ball in the ring there. Although, as I say, it's still contrived, and I think the alternative media are doing a very good job at the moment in shaking things around. And we're a small show. We're obviously not as big as a lot of the networks out there, but we're throwing our 2 pence in, and our shows are easily accessible all around the globe. And we've got a nice archive here, and we're not going anywhere. So we're quite proud of our community here, and again, I think that's a big thank you to all you downloaders out there that have been following and supporting the show for a long time now. And the guest we've got on today actually is the first find from our new host John White, who thought this guy would be very interesting, and I totally agreed with him because he's a very good YouTube blogger that's growing in popularity by the day. And with that, I think I should actually just head down to the coast, down south, and bring on Mr. John White. How are you doing, John?
Hiya, Paul. Oh, I'm really good. I'm looking forward to tonight's guest. He's a young man called Chris who YouTubes as the name of Chicken Wire, and he's on the young Labour voting side of the population. So we may have some differences between us, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if we can maybe bridge those. And the documentaries he's been putting up have been getting some really good attention, especially one he's put called "How Britain Broke," and that really seems to have spoke to people, and that's how I became aware of him. And it's a really well-researched video that it follows the last 20 years, and it shows that Chris really wants to understand the base of how the world came to be and how to take it forward. So that's the sort of person I'm very interested to talk to.
And his YouTube channel is called Chicken Wire, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, Chicken Wire.
Right, okay. Well, let's crack on.
Well, hello, Chris. Welcome to the show.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Oh, we're really glad to have you on. And I would like to start off by talking about your YouTube channel, Chicken Wire. And I think what I'd really like to find out, as much as you feel like sharing, is the story of how you came to be where you are today, making these videos, analysing society, putting out opinions. So Where would you like to start?
Well, do you want me to start from the bit where I had no friends, or the politics bit?
Whichever you think is the right way to sort of tell your story. So,
Okay.
how have you come to be doing what you're doing?
Okay, so I had no friends in school. Let's get that straight. And
Oh,
then I used to make up various things to kind of get attention when I was at school. Quite embarrassing story. I made up a song called Chicken Wire Song. I
Okay.
don't know if you've heard it. It's on my channel. It's way back on my channel. Hence the name of my channel, Chicken Wire.
aha! I shall have to excavate to find it. I haven't been that far back.
Basically goes chicken wire, do chicken wire, and so
Okay.
it goes on like that. And that's Chicken Wire Song. Okay, so I carried on doing kind of comedy stuff on my channel. It started about a year ago.
Okay.
The original Chicken Wire Song got 70,000 views, but I made it during the time I was at uni.
Right.
I actually deleted the original video, and the video that's now on there is actually a re-upload. It hasn't done it as well in this channel that I've made since this last year. But anyway, I made this channel like a year ago. It's I started off doing like comedy things, mashups, basically anything, any old thing. Hence the name Chicken Wire. It's not really like a specific political channel.
Okay.
Until the whole Donald Trump saga started going off, I started to notice that a lot of Americans in particular started uploading videos where they just filled in maps, and they got a lot of views and they got a lot of reaction and people like and dislike.
I saw one of those. I saw that you did one of those, and you were going around the world, and you were filling it in as either red or blue, depending on whether you thought they'd like Trump or Clinton. And I thought it was a really interesting idea, but that's what a lot of other people were doing that were they? Because we don't always see this kind of stuff. We're in other places on the web, so from your age group and how they are talking about ideas, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so there was a lot of people doing like Trump videos before Trump got elected. Obviously, there was a lot more support for Trump than people expected. Now, the online world had that support. Like, it was blatant from the online world to me that Trump was going to win because of the support and the videos and the comments and all of the stuff I saw online before Trump got elected. It was the opposite with the Scottish independence referendum, which is why I sort of didn't believe it. But I think back when we had that, it was a lot less. The internet had a lot less of an influence over the world than it did in 2016.
Oh, we've really seen that, haven't we? The change in the way that people are looking outside of what used to be the reliable media and looking with this hunger even for alternative perception. So you were doing your thing. You were satirizing society. You were being a comic.
Yeah.
And then you noticed trending that wasn't reflected in what the mainstream narrative was. And so while the BBC and Sky and, oh my God, you couldn't find an American channel that didn't think Clinton had it in the tank, could you? But you saw something else going on.
Well, hold on there a minute.
Okay.
There is, if you go on Twitter is very left wing. If you look at the comments on Twitter, especially after things like the Brexit vote, after the election, after the American election, then you find a lot of people who, and Facebook actually, who are just like almost in despair about what happened in those votes, because they're not right wing. They don't believe that immigrants should be locked out. They don't believe that gay people should lose their rights. They don't believe that abortion should be abolished.
Yes, those are all very strong.
It's difficult for those people to have their opinions heard in a world that's becoming ever more kind of isolationist, especially in America, that was happening. Now, to suggest that everyone in America was anti-Clinton.
Oh no, I'm not suggesting that at all. But just from what you've seen on social media, you saw a different trend.
I saw there's a different trend on YouTube as to what there was on Twitter, but definitely on YouTube in particular. I saw more Trump videos before the Trump election. In particular, I saw people filling in maps. Like, it was like everybody loves to have an insight as to how their vote will go, and they like to know tactically how their vote, how that cross on the sheet is going to be effective compared to everyone else. So they like to
absolutely.
They like the kind of Jeremy Vine kind of graphic kind of stuff, and that was what got me into it before the US election, and then I started it again before the UK election.
Okay.
And it carried on. I also did kind of more kind of video essays and predictions, top 10 predictions for the UK election, and it carried on. And
then you came on then to design and put out How Britain Broke.
Yes.
And what was your thinking when you decided to make that video?
So first of all, I'd already made a video on my channel before the election, like a month before the election. There was a video on my channel that went viral for my channel. It got like 10,000 views, and it was about, all I did was show the pattern that's gone on from 1945 to now, of how it's always been Conservative Labour, Conservative Labour, Conservative Labour, and how the vote share from each has grown and shrunk and grown and shrunk.
Yes.
And there's a lot of comments on that video from people that just saw the pattern. They saw the continual kind of, like, the way it was continually going, and the way how inevitable Theresa May was seeming as a prime minister. Now, because they knew she was an inevitable kind of outright, she was going to win this huge Tory majority and she was going to have all this power, they decided to vote Labour. Now, I made the video after the election, after the Grenfell Tower attack, actually.
Yes.
Attack, not fire, not attack.
Fire, yes.
About how the continuing pattern of Labour saving, Labour spending, Tory saving, has gone, and how it's led to Britain being in this kind of sense of disarray. There's a huge sense of disarray after the election, and it seemed to, obviously, I didn't expect it to do so well, but obviously the title, How Britain Broke, struck a huge note with a lot of people, and that's why they clicked on the link. Now, there's, 400 dislikes on that video, so I'm not saying that I have this overwhelming sense of superciliousness.
We have some people will give you a dislike just because it's done well, because people are like that, aren't they? I mean, what I saw in that video was a really rigorous analysis. You know, that you didn't just take talking points of the history and regurgitate them out. You were analysing the progression of events and recognising key points. And I thought that one of the things that you identified that I wouldn't really necessarily thought about was the phone hacking scandal, because I'm a cynical old bugger, you see. So the idea that phones could be hacked and all of this, I mean, that's not been extraordinary to me for a very great length of time. So whenever people were worrying about things like privacy in that way, I was already way past that point. So it maybe didn't have the impact on me, but you recognise that as a point where public confidence in the system, in government, in their protection, and so on, and the way that the media had been able to behave. And let's be honest, they've been at it for years, you know. And I thought that, for example, you picking that out in your analysis, it gave it a unique voice. And I think that people did strongly react to it because you were counteracting the effect of a memory hole, where the media recrafts a narrative, usually about 10 months after an event, and tries to alter people's historical perception of things. But you were getting right back in there and you were laying it out. And I think you gave people a valued set of coordinates to go, you know what? I can follow what Chris is saying. I can follow how we've got to where we are today. So I thought it was a fantastic piece of work. And obviously, that's what led me to introduce you to come onto the show today. So I want to say congratulations for that piece. It was very impressive, and it crossed boundaries because it spoke to us, to me and Paul, as much as it spoke to your audience and young Labour voters. So you really crossed the divide there, and that's a rare thing to do. So it was a good achievement. So congratulations. Also, with your earlier videos, and when you were in the period straight after the EU referendum and how things looked to you after that, and how that fed into a video you made earlier this year, where I think it was election day, wasn't it? And you were agonising as a Labour voter who voted Leave. How could you describe how you saw things from before the referendum campaign to the point where you made that rather anguished plea for all the people who are just confused by politics now, and which of course has given us this confused general election result?
Okay, so my personal politics is more kind of Liberal Democrat, but as I voted for Leave in the Brexit referendum, and because of the whole student tuition fees thing, I've been moving more towards other parties. Now, for me, the Conservative Party represented austerity. As for the Labour Party, they represented the Iraq War, and also when Gordon Brown was in power. He was in power during the 2008 banking crisis, and he borrowed a lot, and it left us in a bad financial situation. So he got associated with that.
Yes, and of course Brown. Although a lot of people maybe don't totally recognise this, it was Brown who was in the hot seat at the time the decisions had to be made to put in place the bailout package and rescue the banks, which was done through the European Union with the Stability Pact mechanism. And although Labour didn't enact austerity, policy was authorised under Labour, and if Labour had have won in 2010, they wouldn't have been able to not do something about it, would they?
No. So I saw this pattern of kind of spending and saving, and I was seeing like this growing sense that the establishment ultimately wasn't working for us anymore. So for me to vote for the establishment and to vote for the Conservatives and Theresa May felt like a betrayal of that. But at the same time, I wanted to see Brexit enacted, and I wanted to see the kind of just things just done smoothly and strong and stable, as Theresa May put it.
That makes an interesting question, actually, there, Chris, in terms of there has been confusion over exactly what Labour's Brexit policy was going into the general election. And in terms of the paperwork, it was try to keep the advantages of the single market. But in terms of Corbyn, it seemed to be take Britain out of the single market. Which did you think was the case when you decided to vote for Labour? Was it stay in the single market in some way, keep the benefits, or was it leave the single market?
For me, the single market wasn't as important as controlling immigration. That should be important, and ending the bureaucracy of the European Union. Right. In other words, taking all our laws back into UK government hands. Now, both parties were campaigning for that, so that I didn't mind. But most of all, I wanted to be outside of the customs union so that the UK can borrow from countries outside of the European area freely without European permission.
Yes.
And for me, it was more about just making sure that, number one, we're economically stable, and number two, we're politically stable. Now, none of those things have happened. And that's why I made the video How Britain Broke. But can I just put things in perspective? I watched the Dunkirk movie, Christopher Nolan movie, last night, and we are nowhere near as broken as those times.
No, I agree with you completely. We're not. It's a perception, isn't it?
So for me to say we're broke basically just means that we're not going economically and politically as smoothly as we could be, but actually we're not doing too badly. And I don't mean to play the country down either. I think there is hope even for the Tory party. I know a lot of people think that Theresa May is in dead water. I think she may well stay until 2019, may well stay even further if she manages to get a good deal and just keep things ticking over. I think even if she changes, even if the Tory party changes leader, there's a good chance that they won't lose the election. Because a lot of people, I've seen a lot of comments about how Jeremy Corbyn is a Marxist and how little they want him. And there's this whole scandal recently about his kind of misuse of words over the student tuition.
So that has had a big sting, would you say, Chris? He's being seen as backtracking on a promise.
I don't think it's a massive thing. I think whatever criticism he gets, a lot of supporters just say, "Oh, it's just the media being against him." They don't necessarily criticize him. They criticize the establishment who are against him, whereas people like Nicola Sturgeon or Theresa May get criticized because of them. Because Nicola Sturgeon's too focused on Scotland, and Theresa May is too focused on continuing the establishment of Conservatives, and a lot of people are against that in itself. So if the Conservative Party manages to reinvent itself as something other than an austerity kind of party, then they could, dare I say it, they could gain a small minority or small majority government in the next election.
That would have to be pretty radical, though, wouldn't it? To convince people that they'd actually changed tack and they weren't the same people who'd just spent the last 7 years persecuting the country. Surely the people who are most associated with austerity would have to go. And there'd be new people to take their places to give the Conservative Party a new image.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is very hard for a sitting government to do.
But let me just say that a lot of people didn't see the UK election outcome the way it did, probably like a month before. And
hardly anyone.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just putting it out there that things could be a lot different than you might think they would be now. And I'm not saying it will be like this. I mean, it could just go the status quo. Jeremy Corbyn wins a high majority and he's the next prime minister. But that is the presumed status quo. And Theresa May was the presumed prime minister before the last election. So,
the first past the post is a very strange beast. Do you know how close Corbyn was? 2,600 votes distributed differently across the marginal constituencies would have put Corbyn into number 10. It was that few people's votes had the crucial balance of power in that election. So it was extraordinary, and he was very close. The next election is certainly the Conservatives to lose, isn't it?
No.
Well, if they don't make the reforms, if they don't convince people, they can actually have a positive, something positive to offer people. If they don't do that,
but you're assuming that the same people that turned out for this election, the young people, will turn out for the next election, and the same people that didn't turn up for this election will turn out for the next election.
So you feel there is a chance that people who turned out this year wouldn't turn out at a second election if it, say, took place in 6 months?
Yes, because I feel that people maybe feel a bit kind of disheartened with a hung parliament again. And there could be there could be a bad kind of Brexit turmoil about to come. There could be another recession about to come. I hate to say it. I don't mean to put bad on the country because I don't want that to happen. But I actually think a lot of anti-Brexiteers and Remainers don't want the country to remain stable. They want Brexit to fail, and they want to see kind of things taken back to what they were. And I think in the end, whilst we might get Brexit in inverted commas, we will get an ineffective Brexit. Essentially, we are still in the single market. We still allow immigrants to come in through for a transitional period that will turn out to not be full.
And of course, still paying.
Yeah, still paying. And there will be a lot of kind of turmoil about to happen from both sides. From the hard Brexit side and from the soft Brexit side, as to what actually the people voted for. In the end, we're just going to end up with something that nobody voted for. And that's just going to make people feel as much disillusionment again.
That's the sort of mess politicians tend to create, isn't it? When you give them a difficult problem, which requires some clear, decisive thinking and some bold leadership, and you get a bodgy mess handed back to you, and that's the best we could do, because that's them all over, isn't it? Well, I think I'm tempted to talk more about Brexit now, but perhaps we should hand over to Paul and see what his thoughts are at this point. So, how are you making things, Paul?
Yeah, how you doing there, Chris? It's good to have you on the show.
I'm good, thank you.
Well, I didn't really get a chance to see the whole of your video. I've had such a hectic week this week, but I sort of like watching parts of it as I go, and it was just really well put together because you covered so much interesting history, stuff that maybe people forgotten about, and you sort of compiled it all together. And I thought that was a really good idea. So well done with that. We have had some technical issues. So to our listeners, there's a bit of the interview that we've clipped out and it's gone, and so there were some comments. I didn't know whether we'd actually managed to get the part where you actually criticised yourself a bit about your voice and stuff, and why you put in a bit of extra effort into your YouTube channel to make up for some of the shortcomings you mentioned earlier. One thing that came to my mind on that was a very well-known YouTube guy out there called Sargon of Akkad. That's his YouTube channel. He's very well known. I don't know if you know him, but it made me think of him because he's actually got a very dull, boring voice, nothing special at all, but he does it together so well. He's gone huge at the moment. His channel's huge. Are you familiar with him?
I'm not now, but
right. Well, that was going to be my question actually. What did you think of him and stuff? But no, he's very. I'd say. I think he's kind of like right-wing libertarian, I guess, or maybe not even right-wing libertarian. He's just very anti-social justice warrior kind of thing,
He's capitalist libertarian.
Oh, right, okay, there you go.
But he's not alt-right.
Right, yeah. So he gets accused of it, but he's not totally alt-right. Yeah,
and he loves to spat with feminists.
Yeah, that's right, big time. Yeah, that's the thing. Okay, well, on to Brexit then. You seem like you're more of the left than the right.
Probably, yes.
Well, it seems most of the people that voted for Brexit were of the right. I mean, there was some left, but most were from the right, and a lot from the left that voted to stay in the EU seem to have this very sort of anti-right wing perspective. These horrible right wing anti-immigrants, we're going to vote to stay in the EU just to stick two fingers up at them. Coming from the left, and you're obviously a Brexiteer, is it something that you've always felt passionate about? I mean, what has motivated you through all this time to not want to be in the EU, or is it something that has just sort of come up as the referendum was introduced to you and make you think about it more, or is it something that you've always felt strong about?
To be honest, I got in the polling booth on polling day, and I thought about everything that could happen if I voted Remain, and everything that could happen if I voted Leave. And I thought, well, there's more that can happen if I vote Leave than if I vote Remain. So to me, it was like, if I voted Leave, it's like the vote to have more power in future votes to come. So I felt like voting Leave was like ending EU bureaucracy, getting rid of their kind of control over us and taking power back to the UK. Also, it felt like voting Leave just automatically made things a lot more interesting. And for me, I love it when things are interesting. Now that might sound like I'm making a war to make a video, but I like to get into like the heart of what Britain wants. I honestly didn't expect Leave to win. I had this weird thought in my head that it was somehow rigged, or it was somehow like Remain was somehow going to win anyway, and nothing would happen. I knew that something would happen with Leave, so I voted Leave. It was literally that simple.
Right. I mean, a lot of people have supported the likes of Nigel Farage for many years because he's kind of been going on and on about the leaving the EU. He obviously won the European elections, and that movement was obviously building and pressured the Tories into ultimately having the referendum to begin with. Were you sympathetic to? I mean, what's your views on Nigel Farage? Were you sympathetic with his arguments before the referendum, or?
I think he can be a bit racist,
right,
and a little bit too much in the media. He gets way too much exposure, but he does say a lot of sensible stuff, and he does have a lot of charisma, and he's a good politician. I feel like he got too much exposure, considering he's never been an actual MP.
Right.
He's just an MEP. If he is an MEP and we devalue that so much, then why was he getting that much television time? It felt like, for me, his as an MEP's job, I never understood what an MEP did anyway. And I just felt like an MEP in general is like a pointless political job. And for him to have that kind of platform and to voice those opinions was very brave, but also very, very kind of, I remember seeing something like a couple of years before the actual vote where he essentially just insulted the European Parliament.
Yeah.
Many ways. I can understand, like, with the Brexiteers, how that's like standing up for your country. But you've got to remember that the European Union was formed after the war. You're essentially insulting the unity that Europe has with itself.
Well, this is
insulting that. You're almost acting on the same side and the same way that the people that caused the war. I'm not saying he's Hitler or anything like that, but you're almost dividing the Europe up deliberately, and I don't like that. I think the reason why we're leaving Europe is to leave Europe. It's not to divide Europe.
That's right.
You need to make that clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen a lot of the media. I mean, I'm pro Brexit. I voted Brexit, and I still want us to leave. Just get out, straight cut, and deal with what we need to deal with. But the thing is, when you see and a lot of the sort of the more right leaning media, I like seeing because they're urging on Brexit, and that's all great. But what I don't like to see with them do, and they do this a lot, is they call EU Europe. They sort of make out like if the EU, the French within the EU says something that's not too great towards us or something, they say the French are saying, and this division. I think it's important to remember the EU isn't Europe. It's supposed to be the representative of Europe, as you said, which is actually a great idea. Fundamentally, the idea of Europe coming together and having a great trading relationship, fantastic idea, but it seems to be turning into more of that, turning into a union, almost like the United States of Europe, which wasn't what it was meant to be. But I think while we fight that as Brexiteers, that we don't want to see that, it's important that we don't, as you say, divide Europe, because Europe is much stronger, as the EU claims to say. It's much stronger when it's together, but as long as it preserves the nations that are inside it, you know.
Would you mind if I popped in for a moment here?
Yeah,
Paul,
please come in. Yeah,
to speak about these points, because I think what Chris has said there is really interesting, because it's a very strong pro-EU ideological propaganda point, which I hear that, and I immediately hear the whole of the indoctrination of the history of the EU into the school system, education system, university system, and these messages which have gone out over the last 20 years. But there's I'd like to say a very crucial thing there is, firstly, the EU was not formed after the Second World War. The EU was formed in 1992 as a political federal European Union. Previous to that, it was the European Economic Community, which was about standardizing trade. And before that, it started in 1956 as the European Coal and Steel Community. So it expanded from a sort of industrial cartel base into an organization that laid itself supranationally over the national governments of 28 European states. But those states do still exist in their own right. And of course, by leaving the EU, Britain shows that we can restore individual national sovereignty. So I want to speak into that because, of course, who's really kept Europe safe since the end of the Second World War, in terms of 85% of the money and the materiel and the men, is not the European Union, is not the EEC, is not the collective effort of the European member states. It's America, it's NATO. And it's decades of maintaining military presence across Europe that countered any possibility of the Soviet army crossing further into Europe than it already had when it took Czechoslovakia. So that line against the Soviet Empire and the Cold War period, that was America doing that. That was America defending Europe and keeping it free. And I feel that the airbrushing of history, which has gone on, is so powerful, but also so subtle and so pernicious that people will believe the statement the European Union was formed after the Second World War.
I think there's two sides to these negotiations that we have to separate in order for them to be successful. The first side is that our dealings with the people of Europe. We're not trying to divide them, and we're not trying to lock them out. We need them for our NHS. We do want to control immigration, but we don't want to completely stop it. If we stop it, we're going to suffer economically. And we need them to come over here and trade. We need their businesses. We need open trade negotiations. But then there's this other side of it, which is the bureaucracy of the EU, the Jean-Claude Junckers of the world, that we want to completely separate from. We want to completely leave, and we want to see reformed and changed. But we're not obviously going to get that change anymore because we're out of it. So we want to separate ourselves as much from that and unify ourselves as much to the people of Europe and the people of the world, get trade negotiations with India, America, China going. Now, whether a lot of people have said that that's just going to mean that ultimately we bow our heads down to the world, let China buy us out, let loads of immigrants in, and essentially not even have the reason why we vote Brexit. Even though we've got Brexit, we don't have the reasons there. We don't stop immigration. We're not economically certain. We're reliant on the economies of other people. So we've got to promote British business and British industry more. But to do that, we need investment. And it's like this double-edged sword where if we leave the European Union as the bureaucracy of this European Union, then we risk causing the divisions that make the people of Europe get fed all this information about how we're so divisive and how we're stopping immigrants and we're not funding them and we're not nice to them. They'll be reading all of this on their newspapers and they'll think that we're just this English little Englanders. And that's what most worries me now, is that the people of Europe won't be on our side.
Well,
we need to do our best to get them on our side.
I think I don't know if Paul remembers, but I blew his mind about a week ago, and when I linked up an article which was all about in terms of racism and intolerance across the entire European Union, and it turns out that despite what people say and think about us British, with the exception of a couple of small countries which are about the same level of us, we are the most inclusive, most tolerant, and least racist nation in the entire European Union. And I mean, that's a remarkable fact, that we have a situation where our view of ourselves is so askance to the reality. And I think what you've been saying, Chris, I've let Paul to speak, and I'll speak for himself in a moment, but I'm sure that he does not at all disagree with me when I say that we don't know any Brexiteers who disagree with a word of it. Apart from maybe there's a few knuckleheads to be found at the lower end of the BNP or Britain First or something who really do hate immigrants. I think for the vast majority of those who voted Leave in the referendum last year, the entire issue wasn't driven by a dislike of the other at all. It was driven by the clear lack of control from our government, and our government showing that it's given up willingness and the ability to take control of such a vital social function as controlling the population levels and ensuring we don't get overcrowded and that services don't collapse. So what do you make of that, Paul?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, if you look around the world, it's not common for everyone to be going through this. I mean, it just seems to be Europe. I think America's going through it as well, that this idea that to get trade, you've got to sell your borders. I mean, I think immigration has expanded everywhere a bit more because of that, but you know nowhere these the Asian countries, they're not going through this to the extent that we are and stuff. So when people say, "Oh, we're bigots," if you object to immigration like that and you're saying you're bigots, this and that, I think what you've got to do is you've got to step back and look globally. And if it's true that sort of Europe is experiencing mass levels of immigration much more than everyone else, then you've got to cut them some slack and say, well, maybe they're not bigots, they're just dealing with something at a much higher rate than the rest of the world are. And that's where I get defensive, and I think, well, hang on, this is wrong. It's like, I'd understand if the whole world was going through the exact same thing, and it was just these nasty European nations that were just getting spiky about it, and it was like, what's your problem? Everyone else is happy, but that's not the case. So, but I'm looking at your channel, Chris. You're very good with your predictions and stuff. I mean, how do you see this? Do you think we're just going to end up with a very hard Brexit, have some tough years, and just pull our sleeves up, or can you see is there a lot of smoke and mirrors, and we're going to get a half decent deal, and it's not going to be a big deal? We're going to get out of Europe, and that's that. Or is there going to be some dirty work, and we're going to end up just still being in the EU, probably with a worse deal that we've got now?
It's going to be labelled Brexit no matter what. And whoever's in charge are going to sell it as we've had Brexit. We've done what you said. But there's a lot of Labour is not really like selling the idea of stopping immigration. And even the Conservatives are saying we're going to have a transitional period. And that would anger a lot of people if it meant that transitional period included immigration and we didn't stop immigration. Economically, we are likely to go through a recession, or at least a bit of turmoil over the next few years. And that's likely to put our kind of begging for better trade deals even greater. So we're likely to not stop immigration in favor of getting those trade deals. And so essentially we will get a Brexit. We might leave the European Economic Community, and we might stop all laws from them and use the Great Repeal Bill to import all their laws to UK law, if Labour allow it. They look like they're going to stop it to try and invoke another election. I don't think they'll be successful because of the numbers that they have. anyway, they're on summer break right now. I think there's going to be a lot of mulling over for Theresa May. Jeremy Corbyn's going to look a lot better because he's not on holiday while she is. And the negotiations are going to get dragged out a lot longer than we might expect as well. I know that they've got a 2-year time period, but I think there's going to be this transitional arrangement where essentially nothing really changes in the UK. But we remain politically unstable. In that political instability, the economy is going to waver. And it's, to be honest, after that, it's very difficult to predict because it all depends how Europe reacts to us. I don't think they're going to allow us access to the single market without free movement of people. They're not going to. They may well stop trade arrangements with us and be a bit kind of shifty on that because they don't want to see Europe or the European Union punished, or they don't want to see it divided. So for the UK, it's going to mean a lot of uncertainty, and it's sorry guys, it's very depressing.
No, but you're being honest about what you see, Chris, and that's what we want. Yeah. You know, and yeah, I get it. I mean, you're not an oracle. You can't see into the distant depths of the future, and none of us can. And you know, but you're trying to see forwards, and you're trying to express that to people, and that's what's so really interesting about your work, and you put it, and you're having the courage to put your point of view out there. If you wouldn't mind, I mean, I would sort of come back into that picture and say that, yeah, I fundamentally agree with you, you know, but there's a sort of push me, pull you of forces, isn't there? And that there's going to be some form of Brexit, but exactly what it means, who knows? I had a word with Liberal Leave the other day, because you may not know that all the main parties had a Leave faction. And so there's a Labour Leave, there's a Green Leave even, but there's a Liberal Leave. And you said earlier that you kind of maybe more naturally identified with the sort of liberal democratic, free market sort of politics. And you know, generally, I'd say that I feel about the same. You know, in the circumstances were different. I might have seen myself as a liberal democrat, but the way that the Liberal Party has embraced the Euro cult. And with the light in Tim Farron's eyes, it was genuinely scary at times, wasn't it? To say nothing of Cleggy, and everyone should vote twice if you're under 30, he recently said. So it seems they've come a long way from really upholding those free democratic values. And in Liberal Leave, they've now come up with this brilliant idea where their definition of leave is to stay in the single market. And that's what they think is the best leave for Britain. But I pointed out that this is exactly the same as Liberal Remain, only who want to also stay in the single market, but they want to have a second referendum first. So that shows the kind of mental trickery that a Tony Blair type, Richard Branson type faction could come up with and put a bow on it and call it Brexit and say, there, shut up, you've had it now. And we found a way that whatever you voted, it equals you getting what you get. But I think I'd like to communicate back to your listeners who may feel that Brexit is the most terrifying thing ever. That we did have really good reason for supporting leaving the European Union. And although the image of the European Union amongst the young is very, very positive, it doesn't stand deep scrutiny of the real facts. And that we were promised that we would be properly democratically consulted before the nation was brought into a federal Europe. We were promised it multiple times, not least by Labour, not least in the 2005 election campaign, where they campaigned to become a government on the basis that we would have a vote on what was then the European Constitution. Now, that was defeated in 2 other countries, brought back out with the title changed with Tipex to the Lisbon Treaty, and Gordon Brown just thought he could sign it and get away with it. And there has been a price to pay for that, and it took 44 years. And I know that the elderly people are blamed a lot for voting Brexit and wrecking the lives of the young. But I would ask people to bear in mind that the majority of those who voted to leave in 2016 voted to go in 1974, and that we should listen to their judgment of the promises and how the project actually played out over those 4 decades. We can come together as a nation, and we can have a completely new destiny in the world. And that there's a big world out there, and the EU is only 15% of it.
The reason the election went the way it did was because so many young people turned out. So to suggest that you can't listen to young people, or you should only listen to the old people because
not only, but we should listen. We should still listen to them. You know, I mean, the democratic verdict came out like it did, didn't it? And if it had been Remain, it would have been Remain, but it wasn't.
So you should still also listen to the people that voted Remain. I understand the result of the European vote, but at the end of the day, it wasn't like an overwhelming majority of people that voted Leave. Now, I voted Leave, and I still fully engage with and fully talk to the people that voted Remain, because they are the people that have an opinion just as equally and just as well as mine. In fact, most of Parliament voted Remain.
They certainly did. 70%.
What annoys me a little bit is that the Parliament view of Brexit doesn't represent the national view of Brexit.
Well, over to you, Paul, because I don't want to monopolise.
Well, Chris, I understand you've got some questions from your listeners that you'd like to bring to the table. Have you got those?
Well, it's not questions as such, more opinions from various commenters.
Okay.
I'm just going to relay some of the opinions commenters have on Brexit. Immigration or the economy. Can't you understand that a lot of people, immigration is about economics. Suppression of wages is about economics. Yet you completely ignore this concern. You attribute some people blaming the banking crisis on immigration. This is just untrue. You seem very determined to ignore people's concerns about the saturation of the labour market, the shortage of housing, the stretching of services in the NHS. Perhaps you think people will drop these issues if you continue to ignore them.
Okay. Should we sort of respond each to these, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to go first on that one?
I'll let you go first on that one.
Okay. I think a big hidden secret, which is right in front of people's faces, is if we look at what's happened from austerity being brought in all the way through now 3 Tory administrations to 2010. Certainly between 2010 and 2014, not only was there no attempt to control immigration, there was a deliberate attempt to ramp it up as high as it would go, which of course started back in 2007. But from 2010 to 2016, not only did we have absolute record European Union immigration, but we also had record non-EU immigration. So for Africa, Indonesia, all around the world. So we're having a massive influx of people in. And the European issues started to bite with the 2014 Euro elections, which was the first time in 40 years the word immigration had been mentioned on British television in a national televised debate. It was that long since we'd actually discussed the topic. But now we've discussed it so much in the 4 years since, that's hard to remember, but it was a real cultural wall that was being broken down. But back to what the Tories were doing. I mean, they were flooding the country to massively boost GDP. And they were doing that to help their multinational friends, who, of course, offshore most of the profits. But it goes through the books first and makes UK PLC look good, because we're trying to pay these crippling austerity payments we can't put the taxes up because that will put taxes down. Once you start to take too much tax, you start to actually lose tax because you get tax evasion and it gets more and more serious. So they were trying to boost the economy, and that means boosting productivity. So they were just basically cramming people into the factories and of course into the other services as well, and boosting the economy that way. At the same time, as a heroic borrowing to keep the pensions wagon rolling, because if the government hadn't borrowed an extra 750 billion since 2010, the pension system would have collapsed and we would have been like Greece. So there's been these issues in the background. But the fact is that when the immigration tap is turned off, that engine will stop running. But that engine is a globalist engine which is completely against the interests of the British working people and which sucks prosperity out of the country, which is why we've all been feeling so much poorer since the austerity measures came in, because it's not being spent on us via government spending and the money is being sucked out of the economy and being offshored.
Yeah, I would agree with most of that. And I think the thing is, what we're looking at now is the structure. It's not so much, we can't just look at the immediate situation we're in, because if you're structured to go in the wrong way, you've got to start looking at the structure. And there's an argument that immigration is great for the economy in certain areas and whatnot, and that is an argument. But then you can say, why are we in a position, which seems to be the case with all EU nations now, where you rely on immigration for your economy, where the rest of the world don't seem to be relying on that as much. So it's a structural thing we're looking at now with what the EU seems to be enforcing and pushing. It's like with doctors and nurses. Yeah, for sure, we need doctors and nurses, but we should be bringing up our own doctors and nurses. I mean, what if, God forbid, in the future there's a war and the whole dynamic of the world changes? You need to think about your nation's roots and what you're creating here and stuff, and that's just not happening at the moment. We are pressing on with time, so if we can hear your thoughts on that point as well, Chris, and then we'll have time just to pick another one of your listeners' points they raised.
Okay, well, just on that point, I think for me, there's a huge amount of the NHS needs to be protected, and there's going to have to be a very long transitional period when we reduce immigration very slowly, and that's going to anger a lot of people, just because the economic shock of just suddenly stopping immigration like that would ultimately affect things like the NHS and many other industries as well. So there needs to be a transitional period. Now, that's going to anger a lot of people, but I'll just go on to this next question, more about Scotland. It says, is it fitting that a man with Scottish heritage began the road to oblivion for England? David Cameron and his ancestors all hail David Cameron and his ancestors for the bloodlines that inevitably made Scottish sovereignty a certainty.
What can we say to that one, Paul?
Well, I mean, I respect. I mean, I don't really know what that's asking, but I respect that's a lot of Scottish people want their own independence and that side of things. I personally think that Scotland, England, Wales, and I'd lump Ireland in there as well. Their cultures are so similar, such a similar culture, that although we have our differences, I think it makes so much sense that having a union there to protect us and stuff. I understand that there's the differences with Scotland and England in terms of voting. They're much more left-wing up in Scotland and much more sort of conservative in England. So I understand the differences, but for me, that can be sort of unravelled with a progression of politics. You just develop the kingdom more and more and more, rather than this abruptness that the SNP seem to want to have. So for me, I see Scotland and Scottish people as the same citizens as myself. I know not everyone sees it that way, so I'm not too bothered about any if someone's got Scottish heritage running the country, as long as they're not someone from SNP. That might worry me a little bit. But I don't know if that was exactly what the point was there. What do you think, John?
Well, I mean, it purely on the ethical standpoint, I've always felt that Scotland's destiny is for the Scottish people. I've never had any motive to stand in the way of Scotland becoming independent. I had a completely agnostic view on it back in 2014 2014, wasn't it, when the vote happened? But in terms of analysing it from the point of view of reasoning it out, it would seem to me that probably the Scottish people got it right at the time, because the projections for Scotland's economy would have been devastated the following year with the collapse in the global oil price. So maybe it was a reach too far. But maybe the best way to answer it is, what would I do if I was in charge of the SNP today? And if that was my cause and I wanted Scotland to be an independent nation, I think I would focus on the Scottish economy for the next 10, 20 years. I think I would diversify. I think I would try to get the advanced technology in. I would try to get Scotland to become a centre of global technology excellence, so that we could present the question to people again in such a way that the economic argument would be firmly on the side of independence. And I think that the SNP saw their chance and went for it, but following the failure of the Gambit, I think they've taken too long, really, to adjust to the fact that the Scottish people did not say yes, they said no. And I think that Nicola Sturgeon's star is certainly falling now. In fact, I think I heard that Theresa May no longer directly sees her, and she has to see the Scottish minister instead because of the loss of status that losing the majority standing in the Scottish Parliament now has for the SNP. But I've never felt that any country should be part of the United Kingdom if they didn't want to be. And I know that has been a vexed question in the history of Ireland and so forth. But largely, many of the things that could have been looked for from independence, the Scottish independence was a question in the late 70s. And at the time, I think there was a referendum in the late 70s. And at the time, the people said no quite firmly because they said, well, all our jobs are British. Why would we want to leave Britain? And Scotland's a very different country today to it was then, with the collapse of heavy industry, which, of course, in a bigger picture, we can point a finger at the EU on that one. But that's the interconnectedness of all things at work. No antagonism towards Scotland, and the Scottish people will find their own destiny. But I think that probably the balance of reason will be that the United Kingdom has worked for several hundred years and will probably keep working and is worth sticking with.
Okay, well, we're heading towards the end now. If you can give us some thoughts on that, Chris, and then just anything that else you'd like to say, and we'll have to wrap it up. So the floor is yours to end it up.
I don't think they should be, and I don't think they will be. I don't think they will be because I think in this last election, I was talking to some Scottish voters. They basically felt like they had a choice between the Tories or the SNP. But now that Labour have the momentum is with them, I think in the next election that a lot of Scotland will go towards Labour. That will push out a lot of SNP seats, and that the whole case for independence will be lost. I don't think they should be because it's because of the economic uncertainty. I think the political, the electorate right now is exhausted. I'm certainly exhausted after this. And it's obviously I want you guys to check out my YouTube channel. Hopefully you guys are going to post some links on your website.
Definitely, yeah.
And just check out. I'm going to keep making videos at least more than once every week. Continually debating and discussing issues. I make them more so that you have a platform to debate those issues more than I want you to believe the way I think. But you can more or less watch it, comment, and decide, share, and join in the debate. Essentially, that's the purpose of my channel. Thank you very much, guys, for letting me debate this. I hope you have me back sometime. And
we'd like you to come back, Chris. It's been really interesting to talk to you.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, you obviously believe in free speech. We don't agree with everything together, obviously, but again, you believe in free speech. You've got a mature head about it. You've got some really cool videos. So the more people on YouTube doing what you're doing, I'm happy with that. So yeah, we'll be looking forward to having another chat with you and keep up the good work.
Thanks, guys.
And that was Chris Lawrence from Chicken Wire. Great YouTube videos, and a smart guy as well, young as well. So may he continue doing that. What did you make of that, John?
I thought it was fantastic. We crossed the age barriers. We got a bit of insight from his point of view, and he spoke for other people as well. There's a lot to learn from that interview, and I think there's things we don't agree about, but there's a lot there that we do agree, and especially on the fundamental principles of being democratic in a free society. And despite whether the picture might look very confused and gloomy at the moment, I think it says that there's bridges to be built, and that there is a coming together to be one, and that excites me to get out there and continue to be part of doing it.
Yeah, and kudos to him for coming on the show. We obviously have our own passionate views that aren't always the same as his, but he came on and said his part, and credit to him, and hope he keeps up the good work.
He's a really good guest. It's a pleasure to spend the hour with him.
Right, and it's been a longer, in fact it's been over an hour, so we're going to wrap it up now. Thanks everyone for listening. Please keep telling your friends about the show, keep linking the show, and more importantly, keep downloading the show. Till the next time, we're going to be looking forward to it. Take care. Bye.